The moment they fined me $5,000 for hosting a simple family barbecue, I knew it wasn't about rules. It was about race. They saw a black family and assumed we didn't belong. What they didn't know was that I had the power and the money to fight back. So I bought the club they tried to weaponize against me and banned the entire neighborhood from ever setting foot in it again. After years of grinding it out in Richmond, I finally felt it was time to take a bigger step for myself and my family. My wife, Kenya, and I scraped together every penny we could to buy our first house with a backyard. We wanted something better for our 13-year-old daughter, Amara, who dreamed of having her own space. We settled on Fox Ridge Hollow in Vermont, a place that promised peace, safety, and a tight-knit community. But from the day we moved in, I realized that promise came with unspoken conditions. The first morning, I stepped out to grab the paper and caught an older woman staring at me from her front window. Coffee mug frozen mid-air, eyes locked on me without blinking, no smile, just a slow lowering of the blinds when she saw I noticed. A middle-aged guy 2 lots down stopped watering his plants the second he heard me call out to Kenya. He fiddled with the hose, pretending to adjust it, but it was obvious he was eavesdropping. It felt like we'd trespassed on something sacred, or disrupted an idea they were desperate to keep untouched. Amara's school was the one place where we felt a bit of warmth. She lit up in those first few days, and seeing her smile gave me strength. But when she tried to befriend some girls from the neighborhood, things fell apart. They'd say they were busy or couldn't play right now, but always giggled and ran off when she turned away. One of them once said, loud enough to hear, "She doesn't even look like she belongs here." It broke my heart in a quiet, aching way. At the local grocery store, where the owner knew every resident by name, we never got a good morning that didn't feel forced. It was like we owed them an explanation, who we were, what we did, why we chose this neighborhood. One time, as I paid for a jug of juice and a loaf of bread, the woman behind me muttered, "Those folks won't last here." The cashier gave an awkward smile. I pretended not to hear, but Kenya gripped my hand tight. We started to see it wasn't just one-off moments, it was a pattern. Doors shutting as we walked by, smiles fading, invitations that never came. The HOA, which billed itself as all about community unity, never once welcomed us. No flyer, no call, nothing, just a heavy silence. And that silence hurt more than any outright insult. Kenya, always the strong one, tried to keep things light at home. "Let's show them we're here to add something good," she'd say, even when she came back from the store with tears in her eyes. I tried to believe her, but every move we made felt watched. At night, I'd look out the window and see the same neighbors strolling the street. Not like they were walking, but like they were patrolling. It wasn't paranoia, it was a gut-deep reality. The final straw came when Amara wanted to do a science project with help from the neighbors. She needed leaves from different trees in the neighborhood. Knocking door to door, she was ignored by some, turned away by others, and one guy even yelled at her not to step on his lawn. She came home quiet, clutching 2 wilted leaves, handed them to her mom and went straight to her room. Kenya looked at me, and in that look was everything we hadn't said. Something had to change. I started showing up to HOA meetings, even uninvited, sat in the back, listened in silence. Judith Bramwell, the president, was treated like royalty and acted like it, always flanked by 2 white women who laughed loud, voted in lockstep, and ignored anyone who dared disagree. The first time I walked in, the room went stiff. Nobody asked my name. They just kept talking, as if my presence was background noise. But I watched everything. How they approved funds for a shiny new entrance sign while denying a request to fix the playground where the Latino kids played. How the clubhouse was only used for private dinners, always with the same faces. It wasn't an HOA, it was a gated club. And to them, my family was a threat to the balance they fought so hard to protect. A racial balance, quiet and cruel. Still, we didn't want to fight. We wanted respect, belonging. I just wanted my daughter to play in the backyard without stares, for my wife to tend her garden without whispers, for me to leave for work and come home knowing this was our home, not just our house. But in that neighborhood, silence was a code, and in that silence, a storm was brewing. It was a bright Saturday, the kind that feels like a fresh start. Kenya woke up in high spirits. Amara was helping season the chicken wings, and I fired up the grill with the care of someone setting up a sacred ritual. Just the 3 of us. A checkered tablecloth on the grass, a pitcher of fresh lemonade, soft music humming from the Bluetooth speaker. For the first time since we moved in, it felt like that backyard could finally be ours. The second the smoke rose, I heard a car slow down. Peeking over the fence, there was Judith Bramwell, HOA president, flanked by two friends in sunglasses with sour faces. Without so much as a hello, she pushed open our front gate and marched in like she owned the place. Her heels stabbed the grass as she strode to the middle of the yard and announced, "This is against the guidelines." No explanation of which ones, no courtesy. Kenya stepped forward, trying to stay calm, and asked if there was a problem. "The problem is this, activity," Judith replied, waving her hand vaguely, like it was obvious. Amara looked down, clutching the plate in her hands. I walked over, still holding the grill rag, sweating from the coals and the tension. One of Judith's friends smirked. The other pulled out her phone and started filming on the sly. It was as absurd as it was calculated. Judith pulled an envelope from her purse and handed it to me right there, in the middle of our barbecue. Inside, a $5,000 fine. No prior warning, no notice, no discussion. For unauthorized use of outdoor space, the paper read. I read it again, trying to make sense of it. It's just the three of us. We didn't invite anyone. She didn't respond. Just stepped back and said, "You should have read the rules." Kenya froze. Amara started clearing the plates. I felt something boil in my chest. Not just anger, humiliation. Judith scanned the yard like she was conducting a health inspection. Her eyes didn't see a barbecue. They saw intruders. That fine wasn't about noise. It was a message. You don't belong. And she wanted us to feel it hard enough to never try again. Before leaving, Judith let slip. The HOA can't tolerate any kind of disorder, especially from people who haven't learned the rules around here. That last part wasn't subtle. It was blatant. The issue was never the barbecue. It was the color of our skin, the audacity to smile on that lawn, the black joy in a place where they only accepted silence and compliance. That's when it hit me. This was personal. That night, Kenya couldn't eat. Amara went to her room early, saying nothing. I sat on the porch, staring at the fine like it was a battlefield enemy. $5,000 for grilling in our own yard? No. This was about control, about fear, about power. Judith knew most families would stay quiet to avoid more trouble, but we weren't just any family. On Monday, I tried reaching the HOA office. We wanted to understand the fine, contest it, find some reason. No one answered. We left emails, voicemails, even a formal letter. Nothing. A week later, another letter arrived. The official bill with a payment deadline and a threat of interest. They were banking on breaking us financially. It was the coward's way of pushing someone out. I dug into the HOA bylaws, line by line, found no clear ban on family barbecues in private yards. The rules mentioned public events and excessive noise. Neither applied to that Saturday, yet the fine stood. It proved this wasn't about rules. It was about who they chose to punish, and why. A white neighbor 3 houses down threw a birthday party with 30 people and a DJ in their garden. I saw cars on the sidewalk, drinks flowing, kids running, music blaring until 1 a.m. No inspector showed up, no envelope was delivered. The HOA didn't just allow it, they seemed to endorse it. The next morning, Judith stopped by and greeted the host with air kisses. There, the rules were just decoration. I talked to an Asian woman, Mrs. Liu, who said she got a warning because her grandkids drew with chalk on the sidewalk. It dirties the concrete, they told her. Another Latino resident said he was cited for putting up a hammock on his porch. We were connecting the dots, and they all led to the same route. Judith wielded the rules like a whip disguised as policy, and most people went along, out of fear or convenience. That Sunday, I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't back down. I wouldn't bow my head. I wouldn't let my daughter grow up thinking her happiness was a problem. The barbecue she dreamed of wouldn't be remembered as a source of shame. It would be the spark. And while Judith and her cronies laughed at their own arrogance, I started thinking about how to turn their attack into ammunition for something much bigger. The fine exposed us, not just to our own eyes, but to how the neighborhood watched us, or rather, surveilled us. From that moment, everything around us carried a new layer of meaning. I noticed some residents crossing the street when they saw me. Others stopped talking and glanced sideways. There was no doubt anymore. This wasn't just hostility. It was segregation dressed up as daily life. One afternoon, I passed the Clubhouse parking lot and saw 2 guys unloading cases of wine and embroidered tablecloths. One of them spotted me and chuckled. "Bet the next party's gonna have soul food, huh?" The other added with a smirk, "As long as there's no rap blasting, we're good." I stayed quiet, but something tightened inside me. They didn't bother hiding it anymore. They knew they could say that without consequences. When I tried talking to an older resident about the fine, he shook his head and said, "You folks just got here and you're already making too much noise." I said we were just trying to live in peace, but he cut me off cold. Peace doesn't mean trying to change the vibe around here. The vibe was their code. The white, quiet vibe where any black joy was seen as a threat. Judith didn't need to be everywhere. The racism worked through others. Kenya started getting ignored at the weekly community garden meetups. When she offered to help prune the flowers, one woman said, "We do it our way, hun. Best not to mess with it." Then she whispered to another, "Everyone's got their own culture, right?" That's when we got it. They didn't want us to join in. They wanted us to feel out of place until we left on our own, like they'd done to others before us. It was around then that I realized Judith had eyes and ears everywhere. Every move we made seemed logged in some invisible ledger. Even when I called a black electrician to check our house's wiring, that same day I got a note saying, "Maintenance by unapproved vendors may compromise the neighborhood's aesthetic standards." That same guy had worked on the HOA vice president's house days earlier. I started digging, made a spreadsheet, tracked dates, times, patterns. It was impossible to miss. The targets were almost always black, Latino, or Asian families. They were the ones getting warnings, having their door decorations removed, being called out for tiny things like a visible clothesline or grass not trimmed to exactly 1.5 inches. This wasn't management. It was deliberate exclusion. Talking to a new Nigerian neighbor, Chidi, I heard another story. She said in her first month, she hung a colorful cloth on her porch to dry. The next day, it was gone. Found it later, tossed in the communal trash with a handwritten note. "This isn't the projects." She cried as she told me, but added, "They want us to be ashamed of existing." That was their whole playbook. One day, I saw Judith leave the HOA office and hurry into the clubhouse with a black folder, looking nervous, like she was hiding something. Later, I overheard 2 women at the store. "Things are getting messy at the association. If she's not re-elected, she's in trouble." Something clicked. Until then, I'd just been trying to survive. But now, a new question formed. What was Judith hiding? The anger growing in me wasn't reckless anymore. It was methodical. I wanted to understand how she held so much power and how this unjust system was so tightly shielded. Kenya, more reserved, started saving old HOA flyers. Amara kept asking why people here were so weird to her. I didn't have an easy answer, just a certainty that there was a system behind it, and it could be broken. By then, I wasn't chasing acceptance anymore. I wanted truth, and, if possible, justice. That search led me to a reclusive man in an old house at the end of the street, a neighbor everyone avoided, but who knew the HOA's past better than anyone. He'd be the key to dismantling the castle. I just didn't know yet what he was about to reveal. The neighbor at the end of the street was Raymond Greaves, a loner, always wearing a worn cap and a wary look. When I knocked, he took his time opening the door. "You're Judith's new target, huh?" were his first words. No sarcasm, just certainty. He invited me in. The house was dim, stacked with papers, old folders, and boxes labeled with dates. Time seemed frozen inside, but the records were alive. Raymond was one of the HOA's first members before Judith took over. He showed me old meeting minutes, contracts, fund transfers, and financial reports dating back to 2003. She runs this place like it's her personal kingdom. Nobody questions her anymore. I started reading, and something stood out. Unexplained expenses, contracts tied to repeating last names. Judith Bramwell wasn't alone. Her daughter's name, L. Bramwell LLC, popped up in multiple transactions. I asked to take pictures. He nodded quietly and said, "If I disappear tomorrow, you'll know why." He wasn't joking. What he showed me revealed that the clubhouse, that elite space we couldn't step foot in, was about to be auctioned off due to the HOA's mounting debt. Judith was hiding it from everyone. She plans to buy it through her daughter and act like she saved the community. The scheme was laid bare. With the photos on my phone, I rushed home and showed Kenya. She's gonna buy it to keep her grip. And if she does, it'll get worse for anyone who doesn't fit her idea of a proper resident. Kenya was quiet for a moment, then said, "Then we have to stop her." For the first time, there was no fear in her voice, just outrage. For the first time, she was ready to fight. I reached out to Vanessa Gomez, a former HOA committee member who'd stepped down 2 years earlier. She hesitated, but agreed to meet at a low-key coffee shop. "If Judith finds out I talked to you, she'll run me out of here in a month." But what she shared confirmed everything. She rigs votes, hides documents, and intimidates anyone who pushes back. Vanessa handed me copies of internal emails and doctored minutes. She uses fear as a weapon. In one printed email, Judith wrote to a staffer, "If that couple keeps poking around, Hit them with another fine. They'll give up. They always do. My blood ran cold. There it was, in black and white. The pressure we'd felt in the air. It was a strategy of attrition, an architecture of oppression. But now, we had proof, and with it, a real shot at shaking the foundation she'd built. I started building a dossier, organized the evidence, the stories, the data, mapped out the fraudulent contracts and shady money moves. A college friend who works in auditing looked it over and said, "This is textbook small-scale corruption. Play it smart and you can bring it all down." But playing smart meant playing cold. Judith was a master at spinning stories. I'd need to be more strategic than ever. In one last talk with Raymond, he looked me in the eye and said, "You've got something she doesn't. Truth and guts. Just don't forget, when you challenge a queen in her own castle, she'll stop at nothing." I left with the sense that the game had shifted. This wasn't just about us anymore. It was about everyone she'd hurt over the years. And this time, she was the one about to take the hit. I learned the Clubhouse deed was slated for auction in under 30 days. Judith, already in the know, was gearing up to snatch it through her daughter's shell company. But she didn't know one thing. I had a plan. And for the first time, the next move was mine. Few people knew, but before moving to Fox Ridge Hollow, I spent nearly a decade in asset management. My specialty was spotting undervalued properties and turning them into tools of influence. Seeing the auction documents, I knew exactly what to do. Judith wanted to buy the clubhouse in the shadows. I'd walk in through the front door and take it in broad daylight. I set up an LLC with a neutral name, Northbridge Equity Group, registered it out of state with a lawyer I'd worked with before. Nothing tied it directly to me. While Judith used the HOA to line her pockets quietly, I prepared my move with even more stealth. Every call, every signature, every transaction was handled with surgical precision. The goal was clear: take from her the thing she valued most. On the county website, I registered interest as an investment firm focused on community properties, used old industry contacts to fast-track the process. In 2 weeks, my name was on the list of qualified buyers. Judith had no clue, and the irony? Part of the money for the bid came from my old firm, one that funded community projects in underserved neighborhoods, the kind of places she looked down on. While I worked, Judith was too busy trying to silence us. She even slipped a note in our mailbox: "Continued violations may lead to greater consequences." Signed, HOA President. It was practically a threat. Kenya tore it up on the spot. "She still thinks she runs everything." I just said, "Let her think that. It'll make her fall hit harder." Behind the scenes, I finalized the paperwork with total discretion. The auction was private, but Raymond got me on the attendee list. Judith didn't suspect a thing, convinced her daughter's bid would go unchallenged. She had no idea the guy she was trying to drive out of the neighborhood would be sitting across from her at the auctioneer's table. On auction day, I showed up with the calm of someone who knows the game's outcome before it starts. Signed the forms, offered cash up front. No counterbids came. The building was mine in under 12 minutes. As I left the room, a county lawyer said, "She's gonna lose it when she finds out who bought it." I replied, "She doesn't need to know yet." One final act was still to come. I kept the company's identity off public records for another week, long enough to secure the keys, authorize basic renovations, and review maintenance contracts. Every detail was triple-checked. This wasn't just about ownership, it was about purpose, about turning her symbol of control into the stage for our resistance, and above all, our presence. Amara asked why I was so quiet. I smiled and said, "Sometimes victories need to be built in silence to be celebrated out loud." Kenya was starting to suspect something, but I waited. The next step needed the element of surprise, and when it hit, there'd be no more hiding behind rules, fines, or exclusive meetings. The stage was set. The night before the HOA meeting, I reviewed the deed one last time. Everything was airtight. The clubhouse was legally mine. No one could challenge it. I took a deep breath, closed the folder, and set it next to the blazer I'd wear the next day. Judith thought she controlled the story, but she hadn't heard my voice yet, and now she'd have no choice. The meeting hall was packed, more than usual. Judith, in a crisp white dress and pearl necklace, glided between seats like she was prepping for a pageant. Her eyes caught mine for a second, and her lips tightened in disapproval. "I hope this meeting stays civil," she muttered. It wasn't for me, it was for the crowd. But the message was clear. I was the problem she couldn't tame. As she droned on about preserving community values and strengthening standards, I stayed cool. Every word was a performance, a last-ditch effort to hold her grip on the narrative. She proposed new penalties for repeat violations, citing barbecues, unapproved guests, and tacky decorations, that last one said while staring right at me. Stifled laughs rippled from the back. I waited until she said, "If there are no objections, we'll move to a vote." That's when I raised my hand. She frowned. "Do you have a comment?" I stood slowly, grabbed my leather folder, and walked to the front, feeling every eye track me. "Actually, I've got something bigger than a comment," I said. The room went still. Judith crossed her arms. "If it's personal, I suggest handling it elsewhere." I opened the folder, pulled out the clubhouse deed and held it high, hand steady. "This space, this building, is now my property." A murmur cut through the room like a sharp breeze. Judith's eyes widened, her arms still crossed, but her shoulders, once proud, started to slump. "That's absurd," one of her friends scoffed. "It can't be legal." But it was. I placed a copy of the contract on the president's table. "It's all filed." Judith tried to laugh it off. "You don't have the profile to manage a place like that." The word profile dripped with venom. I stared back. "You're right. My profile isn't someone who manipulates a community, makes rules to exclude, or uses power to cover up scams. My profile is someone here to change all that." The room, once her echo chamber, split between shock and relief. The silent ones finally saw the walls cracking. And before anyone asks, no, the clubhouse won't be available for dinners disguised as meetings or parties that exclude people based on skin, accent, or background. Judith opened her mouth, but I kept going. "No more private bookings. No more selective access. From now on, this is a true community center for everyone." An older woman in the corner started clapping, alone at first. Then others joined. Judith slammed her hand on the table. "You can't turn this into a circus." I stepped closer, keeping my tone even. "The only show here was your reign of hypocrisy, and it's over." She trembled slightly. Someone whispered, "He's right." And then she saw it. She was surrounded, not by allies, by truths. How many families did you find because of their skin? How many white parties did you greenlight while shutting down any hint of culture that wasn't yours? How many times did you look at us like we were a plague? Her silence was the answer. And there, in the middle of the room, she had nowhere to hide. Judith Bramwell, the neighborhood queen, was dethroned by a signed document wielded with smarts and justice. When I finished, I stepped back from the table. Kenya watched from the back, tears in her eyes. Amara gave a small, proud smile, like she finally got what it meant to fight back. And the eyes of many residents, once cold, softened, like they were seeing for the first time what had been in front of them all along. As I gathered my papers, Judith sank into her chair, defeated. No one comforted her. None of her loyal sidekicks spoke. All that remained was the creak of chairs, the weight of her fall, and the echo of a truth that couldn't be ignored. She lost the space she used to oppress us, and we gained more than a building. We gained a voice. The day after the meeting, I went to the clubhouse with a locksmith. The old locks were removed, and with them, all the symbolism of a space built to exclude. We installed keycard locks, accessible to all residents, added security cameras, not to spy, but to ensure no one was kept out. The building, once quiet and sterile, was starting to feel alive. The first thing I did was take down the private use, prior approval required sign. In its place, I put up a new one, open community space, all welcome. Kenya hung colorful fabrics in the windows, and Amara helped set up a bookshelf with donated books. The rooms were cleaned, rearranged, and prepped for workshops, meetups, and playtime. It was a rebirth, and this time, no one needed permission. At first, people trickled in, a Latino family with 3 kids, then a Haitian woman with a homemade cornbread. Within a week, over 20 residents, many who'd never set foot in the clubhouse, were there, smiling, talking, being seen. A boy pointed at the ping pong table and asked, "Can we really play here?" I said, "Yeah, and you don't need to ask anyone." That space, once filled with cold meetings and judgmental stares, came alive. The halls echoed with laughter, soft music from different cultures, and the mingle of new scents. It was like the building was breathing for the first time. Amara made friends with a Filipino girl named Samira. "We never had a place to hang out here," she said. That said it all. The exclusion wasn't just silence. It was theft, of childhood, of belonging, of joy. Judith showed up 4 days later, tried her old key, which didn't work. She banged on the door, glaring at the camera. I went out to talk. "You can't do this. This place has rules." I replied calmly. It does. New ones, made by people who actually want a community. Her eyes burned with restrained fury. You're ruining what we built. I said, no, I'm fixing what you poisoned. She tried rallying her few remaining allies, sent letters, called for votes. Nobody showed. The spell was broken. Without the clubhouse, she wasn't seen as the boss anymore. And without that, all she had was the bitter memory of an exclusionary empire she thought would last forever. The neighborhood, little by little, was choosing a new kind of leadership, one that included, listened, built together. That Friday, we closed the first week of the new clubhouse with a cultural night. Caribbean food, African storytelling, acoustic samba, old photos projected on the walls. Kenya got choked up. This place, it finally feels like ours. And it was. For the first time, the neighborhood breathed like a real community. The doors were open at last, but there was more to come, because Judith hadn't been fully exposed yet. The weeks after felt oddly calm. Judith was too quiet, but I knew her silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy, so I kept gathering evidence. With Raymond's help, I finalized a detailed dossier. Bank statements, transfers between HOA funds and her daughter's companies, records of rigged votes, even racist messages swapped in a private chat with other HOA leaders. With the documents ready, I called for an open, extraordinary meeting. The hall was packed. Some sat quietly, others whispered, curious. Judith showed up with her usual arrogance. I assume this is just another attempt to disrupt our structure, she said. I didn't bite, just placed a folder on the table and fired up the projector behind me. The truth would speak for itself. The first slide showed a fraudulent garden renovation contract, overpriced by 300% and signed by L. Bramwell LLC. The room stirred. Next, I projected bank statements showing monthly HOA funds funneled to a personal account. Judith tried to stand. This is a privacy violation, but it was too late. The next slide showed an email where she wrote, "These new residents, they don't know their place. Time to teach them a lesson." The room erupted. A woman shouted, "I got one of those unexplained fines." An older man stood, "You blocked me from using the club with my grandkids." Judith tried to talk, but her voice was drowned out. For the first time, residents heard what they'd always suspected but never dared confront. She wasn't a leader. She was a tyrant, and her mask was in tatters. Amid the chaos, I raised my hand for quiet. All this is documented, and it'll be turned over to the proper authorities. But first, you have the power to decide. Does this woman represent the values we want to uphold? A pause. Then, one by one, hands went up. It was unanimous. Judith was officially removed as HOA president by open vote. The crown fell right there in front of everyone. She sat frozen, face pale, hands shaking on the table. One of her old allies tried to comfort her, but Judith pushed her away. For the first time, she was alone. And maybe for the first time, she felt the weight of what she'd caused through years of exclusion, humiliation, and abuse of power. "You'll regret this," she muttered as she stood. No one answered. The silence was now hers to bear. 2 days later, I saw a moving truck parked at her house. No goodbyes, no nosy neighbors. Just boxes, slamming doors, and a defeated woman slipping out the side, like she was fleeing her own story. Amara watched from our window. "Is she leaving?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "And this time, she won't be missed." The days after felt lighter. People greeted each other more easily. Some even apologized for not speaking up sooner. "We were scared," one admitted, "but you showed us we could stand up." I wasn't after praise, but every genuine thank you showed something bigger had shifted. Judith fell, but it was her system that truly crumbled. Even with her gone, her traces lingered. But now, instead of silence, there was voice. Instead of fear, there was unity. And the space once ruled by an authoritarian queen was now shaped by diverse hands, different faces, voices once stifled. Her era was over. What came next would be defined not by exclusion, but by celebrating belonging. A month after Judith's fall, I fired up the grill again. Same style, same simplicity, but the vibe was different. This time, the smoke didn't carry fear. It carried memory. The sun hit hard in the clubhouse garden, and every inch of the space seemed to recognize the new energy. This was the Freedom Barbecue, and nobody there needed permission to smile. We started early, Kenya whipping up her signature sauces. Amara helped set tables with colorful napkins and flowers picked from our garden. The first guests arrived with dishes in hand and hugs ready. Soon, the space was alive with voices in different languages, kids' laughter, and a sound we never heard at Judith's events: belonging. The tables formed a circle, a symbol of equality. No VIP section, no reserved corners. By the grill, a group played drums. Nearby, an older woman taught African dance steps to the kids. The sky seemed bluer, or maybe it was just the feeling of breathing without restriction. One resident said, "This place has never been so alive." Nobody disagreed. During the party, a man approached, eyes misty. "My grandparents were enslaved. I grew up hearing some spaces weren't for us. Thank you for proving them wrong." I just hugged him. His words reminded me of my grandmother, who said, "Freedom isn't what they give you. It's what you build when nobody can control your body or your laughter." Amara darted between tables with a smile I hadn't seen since we moved. "Dad, look how many families came." Kenya squeezed my hand and whispered, "You changed this place. But more than that, you changed how we feel here." I looked around. She was right. The community wasn't the same, and neither were we. We'd stopped being survivors. We were builders of a new start. Late in the afternoon, they set up a small stage and, out of nowhere, called me to say a few words. I stepped up with no speech planned, just looked out and said, "This barbecue isn't just mine. It's for everyone who chose to stay, to fight, to dream. And it's a reminder that even when they try to silence us, our voice finds a way to light the fire again." Applause, hugs, and tears that said what words couldn't. As night fell, we strung lights around the garden. Kids danced on the grass. Elders shared stories of times they thought they'd never be accepted. That moment was more than a party. It was a milestone, a community baptism, a quiet warning. Here, exclusion lost. Here, resistance won, and we won together, as it should have been from the start. The grill's fire died down slowly, but what stayed lit was eternal, a living memory, a new tradition. And even if new challenges came, we knew the way forward, because now we had a place, a voice, and above all, each other. The Freedom Barbecue wasn't the end of the story. It was just the first chapter of everything to come. What would you do if it happened to you? Getting hit with a $5,000 fine just for spending time with your family? Would you have the courage to buy the very space they used to shut you out? It's super important that you drop your comment. You won't believe the twist that went down in this other story popping up on your screen. Check it out right now.